The rules were already taped to the wall when I got there. 7 of them, handwritten on a laminated sheet behind the register, the edges brown with age, the ink faded to the color of an old bruise. I read them twice before my new manager said a single word. Don't make eye contact with customers who cast no shadow. If the payphone rings after midnight, let it ring. Keep the coffee brewing at all times. No exceptions. Lock the cooler doors at 2 a.m. Do not open them again until dawn. If something knocks on the back door, do not respond. Never leave the building between midnight and 5. If a customer speaks your name before you've introduced yourself, tell them you're closed. I laughed. I actually laughed. My name is Nora Callahan, and I hadn't been back to Hollow Creek in 11 years. Not since my mother's funeral. Not since I swore I'd never come back to this part of Tennessee, where the mountains swallowed the signal, and the nights lasted longer than they had any right to. But 3 months of empty bank accounts have a way of rearranging your pride. The job listing had been up for 6 weeks. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Decent hourly rate, no experience required. The Stillwater 24-hour Mart. I remembered the place from childhood, the flickering Pepsi sign, the diesel smell, the truckers hunched over bad coffee at 3 in the morning. It had always felt like the edge of something. I just didn't know what. My manager, Dale Pruitt, was a man who looked like he'd been tired since birth. 60-something, gray stubble, the kind of silence around him that felt earned rather than chosen. He walked me through the store the way a soldier might walk you through a minefield. Careful, deliberate, stopping at nothing without reason. Coffee stays on, he said, pausing at the machine. Doesn't matter if it's slow, doesn't matter if nobody's drinking it, it stays on. I nodded like that made sense. He stopped at the register and tapped the laminated sheet without looking at it, the way you tap something you've touched 10,000 times. You read these? Yeah, I said. Is this a joke? He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Nora, he said. And I hadn't told him my name yet. It was on the paperwork, but still, something about hearing it in that tone made my stomach tighten. I need you to listen to me the way you'd listen to a doctor giving you bad news, not because you want to, because it matters. He pulled his jacket from the hook by the door. Follow those rules exactly, every shift. No exceptions, no debates, no moments of wanting to prove something to yourself. He paused at the door, hand on the frame. This store has been open for 40 years. Those rules have been here almost as long. There's a reason they're still on the wall. The door opened. Cold air swept in from the parking lot, carrying pine and something older underneath it. Something I didn't have a name for. Dale, I said, what happens if someone breaks them? He didn't answer. The door closed behind him, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I was alone on Hollow Creek Road with 7 rules I didn't understand, and a coffee pot I was apparently never allowed to turn off. The first 2 hours were ordinary in the way that feels almost insulting. A trucker buying jerky and a Gatorade, a teenager who didn't make eye contact, an older woman who paid in exact change and left without a word. I restocked the chip aisle. I wiped down the counter. I read the rules 4 more times, each time expecting to find something I'd missed, some punchline hiding in the faded ink. I didn't find one. By midnight, the road outside had gone completely silent. Hollow Creek Road had never been busy. It ran between 2 state routes, a shortcut locals used and strangers didn't know about. But this was a different kind of quiet, the kind that has weight to it, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. That's when I noticed the payphone. It stood at the far edge of the parking lot, under a light that flickered every few seconds, an old Bell model, the kind I hadn't seen outside of a museum. The cord hung loose against the metal housing. I could see, even from inside, that it wasn't connected to anything. The junction box on the pole beside it was open, wires clearly severed, ends corroded with rust. At 12:17 a.m., it started ringing. I didn't answer it. I stood at the window and watched it ring. 11 times, 12, 13. The sound muffled by glass, but still wrong somehow. Too resonant for a parking lot, too present, like it was coming from inside the store as much as outside. It stopped at 13 rings exactly. The silence after was worse. The first customer who shouldn't have been there arrived on my second night. 1:43 a.m., a man in his 40s in a gray windbreaker, unremarkable in every way. He moved through the snack aisle with the casual ease of someone who'd been in 1,000 convenience stores, picked up a bag of chips and a bottle of water, and walked to the register. I started ringing him up. That's when I glanced at the security mirror mounted in the corner above the door. The wide-angle convex kind that shows the whole store at once. I could see the aisle behind him. I could see the shelf he'd been standing at. I could see the chips he'd set on the counter in front of me. I could not see him. The mirror showed me an empty store, chips floating at chest height, water bottles suspended in midair, and me standing at the register, face pale, ringing up nothing. Rule 1 came back to me in Dale's voice. Don't make eye contact with customers who cast no shadow. I fixed my eyes on the register screen. Muscle memory took over. Scan, total, wait. 6:42, I said. My voice was steadier than I had any right to expect. Bills appeared on the counter, real bills, worn soft at the edges the way money gets when it's passed through too many hands. I made change without looking up, slid it across the counter without touching the space where fingers should have been. Have a good night, I said. The door chimed. Through my peripheral vision, I watched the parking lot. A car door opening and closing on its own, headlights sweeping across the front windows, an engine turning over and fading down Hollow Creek Road until there was nothing left but pine trees and dark. I checked the security footage an hour later. The timestamp showed the entire transaction. 6 minutes and 40 seconds of me apparently talking to empty air, making change for no one, wishing a good night to a doorway that held nothing but shadow. My third night, Dale sent me a partner, Travis Mercer, 26, temp hire from a staffing agency out of Knoxville. He had the energy of someone who'd never once in his life been genuinely afraid of anything. The kind of guy who leads with his chin and calls it confidence. He read the rules with the expression people use when they're deciding whether to laugh. He decided to laugh. So what, he said. We're not allowed to answer a payphone. What are we, scared of ghosts? Travis, I said, just follow them. Elena. Sorry, Nora. I've worked night shifts at 3 different places. Gas stations, a warehouse, a hospital laundry at 2 in the morning. He tapped the laminated sheet. I've never seen anything that couldn't be explained by bad lighting and a tired brain. I didn't argue. I'd been him 4 nights ago. At 2 a.m., I locked the cooler doors the way the rules required. Travis watched me with his arms crossed. The beverages need restocking, he said. After dawn. That's 6 hours from now. The morning crew's going to... After dawn, Travis. He waited until I was in the back doing inventory. I heard the cooler door open, the long pneumatic hiss of cold air releasing, and I was moving before I'd made the decision to move. I came around the corner and stopped. Travis was standing in front of the open cooler, a case of Gatorade in his arms, completely still. His eyes were fixed on the inside of the glass door, on the handprint pressed against it from the inside. It was too large. That was the first thing wrong with it. The palm too wide, the fingers too long, tapering to points where the tips should have been round. It was pressed flat against the interior of the glass, the way you'd press your hand against a cold window. Deliberate, communicating something. The condensation around it moved wrong, not dripping down the way moisture does, spreading outward from the print in slow branching lines, like frost forming in fast forward. Travis set the Gatorade down very carefully. "That's just," he said, "temperature differential. The cold air and the..." Every light in the store went out at once. 3 seconds of complete darkness. Then they came back, flickering, strobing, turning the aisles into a slideshow of shadows. The temperature dropped fast. I could see my breath, then Travis's, twin clouds of vapor in the stuttering light. The handprint was gone, but the frost it had left behind remained, spreading slowly across the inside of the glass in patterns that didn't look random, patterns that looked, if you stared at them long enough, almost like letters. Travis locked the cooler with shaking hands. He didn't say another word about temperature differentials. At 3:22 a.m., the knocking started. Back door, 3 slow knocks, a pause, 3 more. Patient, unhurried, the kind of knocking that knows it has time. "Someone's out there," Travis said. Rule 5. "Nora, what if it's an actual person? What if someone's hurt?" Rule 5, Travis. He was already moving toward the back of the store. I followed, grabbing his arm, but he shrugged me off the way people do when they've decided to be brave and don't want anyone slowing them down. The knocking grew louder as we got closer, not more aggressive. Just louder, like whatever was on the other side knew we were approaching and wanted to make sure we could hear it clearly. Travis put his hand on the deadbolt. "Don't," I said. He turned the lock, pushed the door open. The loading dock was empty. One security light above the dumpster, casting a hard yellow cone over cracked concrete, the tree line 30 feet back, dense and black, the kind of dark that doesn't have a bottom. Nothing moved. No one stood on the platform. "See?" Travis said. "Just wind, maybe a..." He stopped. He looked down. His shadow was still facing the open door. Not metaphorically, not as a trick of the light. His body had turned to face me, to gesture at the empty loading dock to prove his point. But his shadow on the concrete hadn't moved. It stood facing outward, arms at its sides, perfectly still, like it had decided to stay behind when he came back in. Travis made a sound I don't have a word for, not a scream. Something quieter and worse than a scream. He slammed the door, threw the deadbolt, and when we looked down at the floor inside the store, at the space under the fluorescent lights where Travis Mercer was standing, there was no shadow at all. We didn't speak for the rest of the shift. Travis positioned himself under the brightest light in the store and stayed there, very still, watching the floor where his shadow wasn't. When Dale arrived at 7 a.m. and saw Travis's face, he didn't ask what happened. He just looked at the floor beside Travis's feet and nodded once, the way you nod at something you've seen before and always hoped you wouldn't see again. Travis was gone before Dale finished unlocking the register. "How long?" I asked, "before his shadow comes back?" Dale picked up his keys. "Depends on whether it wants to." I started looking for answers the way you do when the impossible becomes routine. Quietly, methodically, before the next shift began. The break room was behind the stockroom. Small, low-ceilinged, smelling of old coffee and something underneath that I couldn't name. A folding table, 3 plastic chairs, a microwave from another decade, and tucked behind the time clock, held together with a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it. A stack of employee logbooks going back further than I wanted to think about. I pulled the oldest one and opened it at random. The entry was dated August 4th, 1986. Blue ballpoint, careful handwriting, the kind people used before keyboards. made penmanship irrelevant. Second week, man came in around 1 a.m., wanted cigarettes and a lighter. Perfectly normal until I noticed he had no reflection in the security mirror. Remembered the rules just in time. Kept my eyes down, made the sale, he left. But I could hear him laughing in the parking lot for a long time after his car drove away. The laughter came from everywhere at once. I flipped forward. More entries, different hands, different years, same story told in different voices. Payphone rang for 90 minutes straight. Called the phone company the next morning. They said that line was disconnected in 1979. Something knocked on the back door every night this week. Patterson wants to call the sheriff. I told him the sheriff can't help with this. Customer knew my name, my full name, including my middle name, which isn't on any paperwork here. Told him we were closed for inventory. He stood outside the door for 40 minutes before he left. Found scratches on the glass afterward, too deep, too long to be fingernails. Coffee pot went out during my shift. Temperature dropped so fast ice formed on the windows. Got a new pot going within 3 minutes. Everything went back to normal. The coffee must stay on, no matter what. I found the entry that made me sit down hard in one of the plastic chairs. It was from 1991. Different handwriting. Rushed, the letters pressed deep into the paper, like the pen had been gripped too tight. New hire lasted 4 nights. Billy Hartwell, 19, needed money for community college. Good kid, asked too many questions. He answered the payphone on his 3rd shift. Manager found his car in the lot the next morning, keys still in the ignition, engine still warm. No sign of Billy. Police came, looked around, filed a missing persons report. What were we supposed to tell them? That he picked up a phone that hadn't been connected to anything since the Carter administration. The case is still open, but Billy's not coming back. I know because sometimes when the payphone rings, I can hear his voice on the other end. He's trying to warn whoever's working, but his voice sounds different now. Hungry? My hands were shaking by the time I reached the final logbook. The cover read 1974 to 1977 in faded marker. The entries inside were written in multiple hands, passed between workers like a shared confession, each voice picking up where the last one left off. November 14th, 1974. The new highway extension opened last week. Hollow Creek Road now runs directly through what used to be Abner's Field, the old burial ground on the east side of the county. State said they relocated the graves. They relocated some of them. The section from the 1800s was too unstable. They paved over it. You can see the survey markers if you know where to look, right where the road curves past our parking lot. November 21st, 1974. Strange things started almost immediately. Customers who don't appear on the security camera, phone calls on lines that aren't active, temperature drops with no mechanical explanation. Management thinks it's the building settling. It's not the building. December 3rd, 1974. The rules appeared overnight. Nobody knows who wrote them. Nobody's claiming it. But after 3 workers quit in the same week, management decided to leave them up. They work. Follow them exactly and the incidents stay manageable. Break them and... The entry ended there. Pen trailing off mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted and never came back to finish the thought. The final entry in the book was written in a different hand entirely, slower, more deliberate. Someone who chose their words carefully. My name is Ruth Calloway. I was the night manager here from 1974 to 1977, and I need whoever reads this to understand what I'm about to write is not a breakdown or a ghost story. It is an operational record. Hollow Creek Road cuts through what the Cherokee called a crossing place. Somewhere the boundary between what's living and what's waiting had always been thin. The burial ground made it thinner. The highway made it dangerous. What you're dealing with isn't just the dead from Abner's Field. It's everything that has been trying to cross at this particular spot for the last 200 years. The rules are not superstition. They are the terms of a negotiated boundary. A ceasefire between the living and whatever moves on the other side of it. Break the rules and you step outside the protection of that ceasefire. You become available. The dead don't rest easy when you build roads through their bones, and they get hungry waiting for someone to make a mistake. I closed the logbook and sat in the break room's harsh light for a long time. Stillwater 24-Hour Mart wasn't a convenience store. It was a border crossing, and I was the only one staffing it tonight. The coffee pot gurgled behind me, its red indicator light steady and small in the darkness. I understood now why it had to stay on. The warmth, the light, the signs of human presence. They were part of the agreement. Evidence that the living still held this ground. I walked back to the register with different eyes. She came in on my 5th night like someone returning to a place they'd never meant to leave. A woman in her late 60s, silver hair pinned back, moving through the store with the quiet familiarity of someone who knew exactly where everything was without looking. She selected nothing. She observed everything. When she reached the counter, she poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd just refreshed and settled into the plastic chair near the lottery display. "You're Nora," she said. Not a question. I hadn't told her my name. "You've been reading the old books." I nodded. Up close, she looked exactly as I'd imagined from the final logbook entry. Composed, sharp-eyed, carrying the particular weight of someone who understood more than they could ever fully explain. "I worked here from 74 to 77, she said. "I was night manager when they opened the highway extension. I was here when the rules first appeared." "You wrote the last entries," I said. I recognized the handwriting. Her smile was tired and sad in equal measure. "I wrote until I couldn't anymore after we lost Billy Hartwell to the payphone and Dina Cruz to the back door." She paused. "I kept writing until it happened to me." "What happened?" Ruth Calloway set down her coffee cup and was quiet for a moment. "I broke Rule 7, she said. "January 1977. Bad ice storm, roads closed, middle of the night, a young woman came in. Maybe 22, soaking wet, wearing a dress that made no sense for the weather. She knew my name. She knew things about my family that weren't written down anywhere." Ruth shook her head slowly, but she looked so lost, so cold. I thought maybe I just didn't recognize her from town. I sold her a cup of coffee and a candy bar. She thanked me by my full name, first, middle, and my maiden name, and left. And then, nothing at first. I finished my shift, drove home, went to sleep. She rolled up her left sleeve. In the cold white light of the store, I could see thin white scars crossing her forearm. Too regular to be accidental, too numerous to be anything simple. But my reflection wasn't quite right after that. Small things at first, shadows falling the wrong direction, mirrors showing me a half second behind my actual movements. Then I started seeing her, the woman I'd served, in reflective surfaces, always just behind me, always just outside direct sight. "The scars," I said. "Every morning, new ones, like something was trying to write on me while I slept." She pulled her sleeve back down. Names, the names of everyone who'd worked the night shift here and disappeared. And at the bottom of each list, my own name, getting clearer every day. "How did you make it stop?" "I didn't." Her voice was steady and final. "I learned to live alongside it. The writing stopped after about 6 months, but I never worked another night shift. Can't trust myself around mirrors after dark. Still can't." She finished her coffee and stood slowly. "But I come back sometimes when I can tell someone new is on nights. to offer what I can." She moved toward the door, then stopped with her hand on the frame. "Nora, the rules work because they establish clear boundaries, but the things on the other side of those boundaries are patient. They learn, they adapt. The rules that worked in 1974 may not be enough forever. What do I do if they're not?" Her smile was gentle and deeply sad. "The same way the original rules appeared. You'll know when the time comes. The store will tell you what it needs." She walked out into the parking lot and drove away in an old sedan, headlights disappearing around the curve of Hollow Creek Road. I checked the security monitor. The footage showed me sitting alone at the counter for 40 minutes talking to an empty chair, pouring coffee for no one, nodding at air. But the cup was still there, still warm on the counter where she'd left it. Whatever Ruth Calloway was now, whatever 3 decades of living alongside that boundary had made of her, it wasn't something the cameras could see anymore. I spent the rest of the night thinking about what she'd said, that the rules could become insufficient, that the things on the other side were learning. The idea that they could adapt was more frightening than anything I'd seen so far, because if they were studying each encounter, cataloging each worker's responses, looking for the space between what the rules permitted and what they prevented, then eventually they wouldn't need to break the rules to get what they wanted. They'd just find the gap. The test came on my 7th night, and it nearly broke me. At 2:51 a.m., I heard crying outside the back door. Not knocking, not the patient rhythmic rapping I'd learned to ignore. Crying. A child, high and desperate, the kind of sound that bypasses rational thought entirely and hits something older and deeper. Every instinct I had fired at once. I stood at the back of the store and listened to a child sob on the other side of a steel door and did not move. "Please," small voice muffled by the door. "Please, I'm lost. I can't find my mom." I gripped the edge of the shelving unit until my knuckles went white. The rules existed for reasons. Ruth Calloway's warnings were still fresh in my memory. Boundaries must be maintained. The gap must not be exploited. "Hello? Is anyone there? I'm scared." My hand moved toward the door keys before I caught it. I forced myself to walk to the security monitor instead. The loading dock was empty. The floodlight showed nothing but concrete and shadow and the tree line beyond the fence. Nothing moved. But the crying continued. "Please, I'm so cold. I just want to go home." The voice was changing. Still a child's register, but something underneath it now. Consonants that clicked wrong. Vowels held a half-second too long. The rhythm of speech slightly off in a way I couldn't name but couldn't stop noticing, like someone performing the memory of a child rather than being one. When I opened my eyes, the security monitor showed something that hadn't been there before. A small figure at the edge of the camera's range, child-sized, wearing what looked like pajamas, face tilted up toward the lens. But the proportions were wrong, stretched somehow. The limbs slightly too long, the head slightly too large, and the mouth was moving, but the sounds reaching me through the door didn't match the movements. "I can see you watching me," the voice said. The warmth was gone from it entirely now. "I can smell the heat coming off you." The figure on the monitor raised one arm and waved directly at the camera, its fingers bent at angles that human joints don't allow. When it smiled, its teeth caught the floodlight like polished glass. I backed away from the monitor. Nora Callahan. My full name spoken clearly through the steel door. Birch Street, apartment 4. Your brother Kevin in Memphis. Your father in Knoxville, who you haven't called in 8 months. You're afraid of confined spaces and you count ceiling tiles when you can't sleep. Every detail correct. You broke Rule 7 4 nights ago when you served coffee to Ruth Calloway. She never told you her name. You recognized her from the logbooks, but she never introduced herself. You violated the rule without knowing it. My stomach dropped. And when the boundary breaks, Nora, the door is just a formality. The back door's deadbolt began to turn on its own. Slow, deliberate. Each mechanical click echoing through the store like something counting down. I ran, not away, toward the break room, toward the logbook stack, pulling the newest one from the pile and flipping to the first blank page. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen, but the words came without hesitation, as if something was guiding them. Addendum to night shift protocols. If Rule 7 has been unknowingly violated, implement the following immediately. Turn off all lights except the coffee pot indicator. Stand in the center of the store. Recite aloud the name of every night shift worker who has disappeared, as recorded in the employee logbooks. Do not stop until sunrise. Do not stop for any reason. The moment I finished writing, the deadbolt stopped turning. Complete silence. Then from outside, a sound that had no category. Not animal, not human. The sound of something that had been certain of its outcome, suddenly finding it removed. I turned off every light in the store except the red glow of the coffee pot. Then I stood in the center aisle and I began. Billy Hartwell, Dina Cruz. I said every name I could remember from the logbooks. Every entry, every disappearance, every worker who had come to Stillwater, 24-hour Mart, on a night shift and not come back. Dozens of names scattered across decades of careful, desperate documentation. As I spoke them, I felt something change in the store. Not threatening, the opposite of threatening, a presence that gathered around the sound of each name like warmth around a flame. The disappeared workers, adding whatever they still had to give to the boundary that had failed to protect them. Each name strengthening something. Each name a brick in a wall being rebuilt from the inside. I recited names until my voice was raw, until the pine trees outside began to separate from the darkness, until the sky through the front windows shifted from black to the particular gray that comes as before dawn. Dale arrived at 7 a.m. and found me standing in the dark, still speaking names, voice reduced to a whisper. When I finally stopped, I looked at the laminated rule sheet behind the register. The addendum was there, written in my handwriting, looking like it had always been there. Edges already slightly yellowed, ink slightly faded, as if the store had absorbed it into itself overnight and aged it decades in hours. Dale read it without surprise. Smart, he said quietly. Most people don't find that one until it's too late. My 10th night brought the kind of escalation that makes you understand why some knowledge stays buried. The payphone started ringing at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before midnight, before the rule applied. I logged the time. I'd learned to track every deviation. By midnight, it hadn't stopped. By 12:15, every phone in the store was ringing in unison. The ancient rotary behind the counter that hadn't worked in years. My personal cell, even the credit card reader, cycling through tones that didn't correspond to any transaction. Tonight was different. I could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. The first one arrived at 12:47 a.m. Tall, dark coat moving across the parking lot with locomotion that was almost right. Almost. The gait too fluid, the timing between steps too precise, like something that had studied walking rather than grown up doing it. He stood motionless at the door for several seconds before entering. He walked straight to the counter without browsing. His face was ordinary, forgettable, but his eyes caught the fluorescent light the way a cat's eyes catch headlights. A brief, flat reflection that human eyes don't produce. And when he smiled, there were too many teeth arranged in too many rows. Pack of cigarettes, he said. Marlboro Reds. I began ringing them up without looking directly at him. Hello, Nora, he said quietly. Rule 7. Don't serve customers who speak your name before you've introduced yourself. I'm sorry, I said, closing the register drawer. We're closed for inventory. You'll need to... Nora Callahan, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. Born March 3rd, 1994. Your mother's name was Eileen. She's buried in Clover Hill Cemetery, 20 minutes from here. You came back to Hollow Creek because you had nowhere else to go, and you knew it. Everything he said was true. You can't refuse service to someone you've already served, he said. Ruth Calloway was our associate. When you sold her coffee, you entered into a relationship with our organization. The contract is already in effect. Behind him, the front door chimed. Then again. More of them, filing in with that same too-smooth gait, spreading through the aisles with coordinated precision. Dozens of customers who cast no shadows, whose eyes reflected light in colors the spectrum didn't account for. They selected merchandise methodically and formed an orderly line that stretched through the store and out into the parking lot. Elena. Nora, he corrected himself. And that slip, that fraction of a second where the wrong name surfaced, told me something important. The treaty no longer applies to you personally. You've become available. They began forcing me to serve them, one by one, each one addressing me by name, each transaction another link in whatever they were building around me. My name became a drone, dozens of voices layering it into something hypnotic, something that made it harder to hold a single clear thought. That's when I saw it by the payphone. A shadow, unattached to any physical form, standing beside the phone, gesturing urgently toward the break room. Travis's shadow, still moving independently, still present, still trying to help from whatever in-between place it had been occupying since the night he opened the back door. It pointed at the break room, repeated the gesture, more urgent with each repetition. I understood. Between customers, I managed to reach the newest logbook. Below the addendum I'd written 3 nights before, new text had appeared. Different handwriting, dozens of different scripts, every disappeared worker adding their piece to a collective survival record. Emergency protocol for treaty violation through service claim. Invoke the right of final service. Announce that you will complete 1 final transaction for each customer currently present, then permanently close for business. This transforms ongoing contract into terminal transaction, dissolving the service claim through completion rather than refusal. I looked up at the line stretching through the store and out into the parking lot. Attention, I said, my voice shaking but holding. Stillwater 24-Hour Mart is permanently closing for business in 1 hour. I will complete 1 final transaction for each customer currently in the store. After that, no further service will be available. The effect was immediate. Every one of them turned to look at me simultaneously. The first customer, their leader, apparently, let out a sound like pressure escaping a sealed system. You cannot close. The service contract is... I have the authority of the final night manager, I said, and the words came from somewhere that wasn't quite me, from the accumulated knowledge of every worker who had stood in this store before me. Under the original boundary agreement established in 1974, the night manager retains the right to permanently close operations if supernatural activity threatens the integrity of the boundary itself. I felt them behind me then, not threatening, present Billy Hartwell and Dina Cruz, and every name I'd recited in the dark 3 nights before, lending me whatever strength remained to them, their final contribution to someone who still had a chance at the outcome they hadn't been given. I served the last customer, rang up the last impossible item, made change in currency that looked almost right. The store went silent. They filed out with the same coordinated movements they'd used to enter, dissolving into the shadows at the edge of the parking lot, disappearing into the tree line beyond Hollow Creek Road. The first customer paused at the door. "The right of final service," he said. An old law, nearly forgotten. Something in his expression that might have been acknowledgement. "We will remember this, Nora Callahan, when this location reopens under new management." "It won't," I said. He left without another word. At 6 a.m., I turned off every light except the coffee pot, locked the front door, taped a handwritten sign to the glass. "Closed permanently. Thank you for your patronage." I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched the sun come up over the Tennessee hills, burning the shadows back into the tree line where they waited, patient as geology for the next thin place to open. Dale found me there when he arrived at 7. He read the sign, walked to my window, looked at me the way he'd looked at Travis's missing shadow, with the expression of someone confirming what they'd already known. "You invoked it," he said. "Yes." "Smart." He was quiet for a moment. "Boundaries sealed now. They can't rebuild on this spot." "What about you?" "I've been in retail a long time, Nora. I'll land somewhere." He looked back at the darkened store. "It's the next location I think about. There's always another Stillwater, always another stretch of road where the ground is thin and someone needs to stand watch." My phone rang as I pulled out of the parking lot. Unknown number, but the voice was familiar. Ruth Calloway, though she sounded different than she had in the store. More present, clearer somehow, like a signal that had found a better frequency. "I heard about last night," she said. "Word travels in our community." A pause filled with the kind of silence that holds entire conversations. "You didn't just survive, Nora. You evolved the rules. That takes something most people never develop." "Mrs. Calloway," I said, "what am I now?" "Something new," she said. "Something that needed to exist. The question is what you're going to do with it." Through my windshield, I could see Hollow Creek Road stretching ahead of me, the asphalt disappearing into pine forest, the hills beyond dark against the early sky. Somewhere along that road, another location would open. Another worker would find a laminated sheet behind a register and laugh at it, the way I had laughed, the way everyone laughed before the first shadowless customer walked through the door. "There's a truck stop outside Delwood," Ruth said. "Been having incidents for 3 months. The overnight cashier quit last week. They need someone who understands the rules." I watched the road. "When do I start?" I asked. The sun climbed higher over Tennessee, burning away the places where impossible things sheltered during daylight hours. But night would come again. It always did. And when it did, someone would need to be there, following the rules, adding new ones when the old ones proved insufficient, holding the line at the thin places where the living and the dead negotiated their ancient, uneasy arrangement. For better or worse, that someone was me now.